Welcome to the South Burlington School Board meeting. And I'll start with comments from the public regarding items not on the agenda. Alex?
Yeah, I wanted to quickly mention that myself and a handful of other South Burlington High School students have been compiling and creating a condom availability protocol that we hope to implement at South Burlington High School. That has been passed by the principal, health teachers, and the nurses have all approved and support the policy. So I wanted to bring that up as something to discuss in the future.
Okay.
And see what the board's feedback would be on to where to bring that next, the next steps about that policy.
All right, we'll take that under advisement. I don't know if that falls to a board level decision, but
We can talk about it at a later time, you and I, and determine what we want to do with that.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thanks, Alex.
No problem.
Other comments from the public? Items not on the agenda. All right, seeing none, we will move on to any amendments to the agenda.
Yeah, so I have one amendment, and it is under the consent agenda. I need you to correct under the retirement/resignation area, Eric Stone, 1.0 science teacher. It's actually a 1.0 math teacher. I just want to be clear. So if I could just have you change that. Other than that, that's all I have.
All right, and we'll move on to announcements and our student rep report.
All right, Alex.
Yes, I'll start. So this past 2 weeks, this last week, Big Picture students have been presenting their spring term exhibitions. We do this to defend our learning and celebrate and share the things that we have accomplished and pursued educationally during the spring term. So this week we're doing that. Also, a Big Picture student, Nate Plouffe, created a short film about suicide prevention and mental health, and that was screened at the school on April 12th, and there was a Q&A and film discussion afterwards. There was a chorus concert scheduled for Sunday, but it was canceled. I don't believe if it was rescheduled, I couldn't find the date.
Hasn't been, and we don't think we're going to maybe be able to do that, so.
Okay, that's unfortunate. A student-directed show, I Don't Want to Talk About It, was shown last week on April 9th and 10th. I know the students were lots of seniors and other volunteers, and they worked really hard on that show, and I attended. It was really impressive. On April 10th, South Burlington High School hosted the SATs for 11th graders, the Fitness Gram Pacer Test for 10th graders, and the SBAC for 9th graders. The South Burlington High School Wolf Girls tennis team defeated Essex 5-2 on April 10th. Band and chorus students went on a trip to New York City around April 6th. 3 South Burlington High School students who are part of the tech program won gold medals at the Skills USA competition, and the lacrosse team won 13-4 against Rice on April 5th.
And then also tonight is the 38th Annual Arts Festival, which is a tradition where we showcase arts and music programs for all of our students. And this year's the first time that elementary school music performances will be a part of it. Chamberlain School will host its annual PTO Fun Run on May 11th, which is a much-loved tradition that emphasizes all school participation in community building. Orchard School and Rick Markoff Central School have joined Chamberlain in offering kindergarten registration this week, extending a warm welcome to our soon-to-be kindergarten students and their families who will join our schools in August of 2018. Frederick H. Tuttle Middle School is in deep process of their spring musical called The Sound of Music, which is planned for May 11th and 12th. And then also this week, South Burlington High School has been celebrating Speak Week, which I've been a big part of making that happen, which all this week we've had a bunch of guest speakers in the auditorium and workshops in other rooms. And then also this Friday is the National Walkout, and I was just going to answer any questions and clarify anything because I know a lot of people have been confused about that and how that day is going to look. So if there is any questions about that, I can answer.
Can you maybe go ahead and describe?
Yeah, so for right now, it's scheduled at about 10 a.m. and students will walk out and they're going to meet on the turf out there, and it's about an hour and a half to 2 hours long. There'll be guest speakers. A lot of students have speeches, and I think there's some other guest speakers. And then at about 12 o'clock, the school's policy and stance is that students should return to class, but I know that probably most students won't return because that kind of defeats the purpose. So I know the school won't be providing transportation, but most students will just be leaving because that's part of the protest. So for that whole day, starting at 10, most students will be gone, but the protest is only for about 2 hours outside. So yeah, that's about it.
What's the subject of the protest? What's being protested?
So this protest is more actually political, and it is moving for gun laws, and in hopes that Congress will have more background checks and all that stuff. So it's different from the last little walkout we had, which was just in memoriam of all the victims from Parkland. This one is more political and is calling on Congress and our local leaders to keep pushing gun laws through.
So, can we ask, what is the district's, and because it's an opportunity to educate everybody, the district's policy on student activism like this?
Well, Patrick's here, but he's got a mouthful, but let me just start by saying, obviously we do want to honor student activism, but we also do have rules and expectations around attendance. And so Patrick has actually been very clear about after any sort of activism, students do need to return, and he can speak a little bit more articulately than I, but I know that for those that don't, are going to have consequences. Again, some students may have permission from their parent, but if they do not, then consequences. And Patrick, am I right in that? I don't know if consequences is the right word, but.
Yeah, I mean, I think that your question was, does the district have a policy about student activism? And I think that policy is really like the United States Constitution. And so when we, I think that courts have been really clear, and principals are always advised to be very, to just be very aware about case law relative to student activism, and certainly my administrative team feels pretty comfortable, knowing what the limits of student speech are and or student free speech. And there's no question that students' free speech extends into the school and extends to the kind of action that these students are taking, and so that it is in many senses protected speech. And so we have to be very cautious relative to administering, say, extraordinary consequences for what amounts to protected speech. And so what we rely on is our kind of standard operating procedures. So, we always plan activities for every class, we always take attendance, we always follow up on attendance, we always notify parents if kids are on excused absence. We'll be doing all those things. And so that's that's more or less the extent of it. And I have to say, this is an aside, but the student council specifically and student leaders involved in this situation have been incredibly respectful of the administration's need to have an orderly environment and I think that the students are very aware that we care about them a lot and that we want to make sure that everybody's okay. And so, but on the other hand, in many respects, civil disobedience, it's as civil as it does have to involve the kind of disobedience part. And so, so we are the entity whom they are disobeying. And so we, as much of a odd construct that seems, that's the role that we have to play. And so I don't know everything that's happening on Friday, and that makes sense that I don't. It's not. It hasn't been planned by the administration. It hasn't been planned by faculty and staff. It's been planned by the student body. And so, when Friday comes and goes, candidly, I'll be happy. Because it is something that, I want to make sure happens in a way that is, as orderly as possible and certainly safe. And so, that's pretty much our position on it. I think that if board members were interested in coming to school on Friday, you would be welcome, and I think that, there may be some limits to access to the campus for just general community, and that's kind of typical anyway. We don't have a campus that's open to the general public all the time, and so I expect to enforce our kind of normal procedures around that, but I would welcome the board members to come and witness for yourself what the students have planned.
Thanks, Patrick. Yeah, again, I think the correction for me, not so much consequences, but standard protocols are in play,
And I assume we have an obligation to keep our kids safe and keep the campus safe, and as well as support students who choose not to participate.
That's right. And again,
That's
that's,
a question, actually.
Yeah,
I'll just put a question mark at the end.
Class. I mean,
Yeah.
like, we're gonna be running school.
Running
Like,
school, yeah.
The teachers are planning activities, they're gonna run class. I mean, that's what we do, and that's what
Yeah.
we're gonna keep doing.
Can I ask a question about student athletes who have games on Friday? Is there?
There is, our policy on that is in the co-curricular digest, which, if you're really good at your web searching skills, you can find online. But the co-curricular digest explains that any students who have an unexcused absence on the day of a game or practice are not able to participate in that activity. That kind of makes sense. And that's certainly an expectation that, kids don't skip class a lot at the school, but the times that they've had a game, we've said, you can't play in your game, you skipped English class. And so if students,
So parents write a note to excuse them.
well, parents always have the right to excuse their children from school, so if,
Then they can come back and play or not?
Let me just answer your question from
Yes.
and then you can figure out the answer. If a student does not have any unexcused absence on their record on Friday, then
Yeah.
they're eligible to play in athletics that day.
Okay.
So that's, but if their absence is unexcused, then they do not.
Okay.
So it will put some students in an interesting situation in terms of each other. And so, and I've communicated that with the coaches and with the attendance office, and we're going to do a pretty thoughtful review of the attendance list at the end of the day with the coaches to make sure that it's very clear, who's eligible and who's not. And this is more a comment than it is a statement of policy, but I don't really think students should be worried about their athletics or their activities if they're not worried about what's going on in class, because that's what we do. I mean, we're an academic institution, and if you're gonna walk out of class, then you should probably walk out of your lacrosse game. And if you wanna make a point, then make the point. But because of our standard operating procedure, there's gonna be a variation within that, and, I think that's prudent as well.
thanks, Patrick.
Yeah, and our student representatives have been nothing but professional in communicating, and we appreciate that and the information as well. Thanks for sharing that. Thanks.
So Alex, one other thing on the announcement. Didn't you have a big picture presentation?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
That was my last one.
Can you enlighten them a little
High
bit
school
about
year.
just a second or two about what you did?
I mean, sure, yeah. Well, it was my last big picture exhibition of high school, so that was really exciting. I just covered some of the projects that I had been working on this semester, including my service thesis project that has been continuing for the past 4 years, which was giving back to the community and educating others on LGBTQ inclusivity and inclusivity in school environments, but also workplaces, et cetera. And through the GSA Club, conferences, working with local organizations like Outright Vermont, like I've been doing that for the past 4 years. So I updated people on my progress with that ongoing project. And I also discussed my school classes, my UVM, Gender, Sexuality, and Women's Studies class, and my internship at a radio station this semester.
And
Oh, yeah. And of course, what it was like being a student representative on the school board.
Little thing.
I think that's when I came in, wasn't it?
Congratulations. Wow.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
I appreciate that.
she was great.
All right, any other announcements? All right, we'll move on to agenda item, any other board questions or comments? Just wanna make sure. And, all right, we'll move on to agenda item 6. Letter of intent from the city of South Burlington regarding land exchange. You want to give a quick update?
So this is called for action, and I think it's important that the board know that I did receive a request from Kevin Dorn about the subcommittee. The last time we met was from this board, last meeting was the request to form a subcommittee to look at some of the specific issues. So they have responded to that request, and we'll be working, Elizabeth and I have a meeting Friday at 11 o'clock with Helen Reilly, the chair, and Kevin Dorn, and the two of us, and we'll be talking about the construct of that particular committee. In addition to that, we are currently in the situation of looking at more specifically the property, the request for the Rick Marcotte site. And again, it's about a 0.7 acre. And so we have been working to identify some of the specifics on that particular property. Again, that will also, I think, be part of the conversation as well as we evaluate kind of next steps. So I'm open for other conversations, and I know others may want
I
to weigh
don't
in.
think we didn't bring any of the map, did we?
I do have a map here. No, it's not very big, though.
Well, I did just want to highlight, we did get a question from a community member, and I thought it might be good to clarify in the meeting here around access to the central school property. And at the time, I believe it was back in the November 17 or 16?
16, because yes.
Yeah, November 16 area, a ballot item went to the voters approving the funding for the TIF district. And at that time, the question of permanent access from Market Street into the central school property came up. And because there was a private landowner there, following that vote, there was some effort made to start to negotiate that. Those negotiations were not specifically successful due to some restrictions that we felt would be disadvantageous to the school district at the time. But subsequent to that, the I'm going to get the wrong, DRB, Design Review Board, modified the regulations such that any party that developed the land that the city has an option on would provide easement to the school property. So the best way I can describe it is that there's kind of a short stub of a property that, or access off of Market Street that would go into the school site, and then wherever that could change from the current access point, plus or minus, but what the school would be responsible for would be connecting that stub into the parking lot area of Central School. In addition to that, there was a small piece of property requested in the LOI for the Midas Street, Garden Street connection at the far
Southeastern border.
Southeastern side of the school property. And at some point in the future, similar to the easement that would be offered off of Market Street into the property, there also is an easement that's granted off of that street that granted the improvement the school would have to do along its southerly border would be a lot longer, but there would be access there at some point in the future through that easement as well. The other question that came up is Market Street is scheduled to have various shutdowns that for construction. That was approved with the TIF funding vote. And David will be working with Justin Ravidu from the city to really, on an interim basis, determine where we may need to make some short-term access decisions into the central school property. We're hopeful a lot of that construction can happen over the summer, but those conversations are going on right now relative to the specific Market Street improvements that are scheduled to start pretty soon, right?
Yeah, I don't exactly know when the
Timing,
start is,
yeah.
but, pretty soon is, I think, very close to the end of the school year, which isn't that far away. And so, and what our understanding is, just for clarity purposes, it's all of Market Street, even, so they did some work on the culvert a bit ago, but this is really, it's not just, resurfacing. I mean, it's grinding it up in a better sub-base, and it's also putting utilities and doing a lot of that work. So it's pretty entailed, as Elizabeth said. So it will require a good amount of time. Our hope is that they'll be able to start on this western section and be able to allow us to reopen at least, so we can even drive on top of, gravel type surface until it's fully paved.
Yeah, so I wanted to just kind of calibrate. I don't know if I left anything out of that, or if you want to elaborate on that.
No, I think, Elizabeth, you covered everything appropriately. Again, the access and entrance into our property, to be clear, we've never had our own, it's not been our we've not owned our entrance. It's been kind of willed to us. We used to, for those that remember back in the day, we always had an entrance off of Williston Road, and it was a 90-degree right turn. And obviously Williston Road has become busier and busier, and so that some years ago was shut down, and this access was granted to us by Randy Munson, and has continued to be in use today. And again, it's in our best interest to ensure that we continue to have an entrance into our school. And again, a lot of this is centered around the conversations of the land that we don't own to the immediate southern border of our property, one of which is our driveway access. So.
And then I think because there is agreement now to work on the subcommittee, a lot of the additional details will be worked out. We, the April 1st deadline that was originally given to the school board in the city's LOI, we don't really know what the hard and fast deadline is at this point, but there is agreement to kind of move forward to discuss. I think some of the issues that were identified at our last board meeting still exist. And just to highlight a few of those, it's really parking, it's traffic flow kind of coming into the school property and potentially connecting through Mary Street. It's access to the Allard Square building, which parking is beneath that building, and that would be either a sharp left or right-hand turn off Mary Street or coming in that access road that is proposed in the LOI, as well as just the board's fiduciary responsibility around the contiguous central school property. Following our original LOI and memorandum of understanding back to the city in late August, early September last year, that followed on with new information that included the noise studies at Chamberlain and just safety and security issues in general around schools. Am I forgetting other board members? Any other specific concerns we want to make sure the subcommittee addresses?
Pretty good list.
I think that covers the broad topics.
So that's where we stand on the LOI. So there's no need for taking action this evening because we are working with the subcommittee. Any comments from the public? Diane?
I would just like to say that, and I've shared this perspective with you, that I would like to gently request that you support the city proposal for a number of reasons. It's 0.7 acres. As a parent, a former parent, many years ago at Central School, I remember when we had one parking lot and safety was a huge issue for buses, for parents, and and I was one of the parents that really advocated for that second lot, which made a huge difference. And if we're talking about additional traffic on Market Street, potential addition of students and buses and parent traffic from Chamberlain in the event that students have to be redistricted. I think it's really a safety issue, and the city is providing an opportunity for an egress onto Mary Street, which gives an additional, option for traffic and buses to exit the building. I think the city proposal also will address the school district stormwater issues. I really think, and a state-of-the-art city library will be in your backyard, which is a building that's congruent to a school district. And I worry that some other building might appear there. And I think it's a win for the school district. I think it's a win for our entire city, and I really, really respectfully ask that you seriously consider that for our students and for our larger community. That's all.
Thanks, Ann. Other questions or comments? Yes.
Just a clarification on the easement piece. So it's, what I heard was that all plans going forward seem to say there will always be set into going forward in any new development easement. Is that just for
Might.
central? Is that
Yeah,
for-
it's really, when the Developmental Review Board put specifics on the land, they were clear that any development or anyone who purchased the properties had to ensure that there was this access, what they call parcel 2, needed to exist into the property. So it's a north and south stub, essentially, that enters into the school district property. That's a requirement of the Developmental Review Board. And so that's an important component, regardless of who purchased that has to happen. So even if the city didn't purchase this, or I don't know exactly where they are, no matter whom would have to do that.
This is strictly about central school.
And this is
This is
strictly
strictly
only about central school and this particular access to our schools.
All right. Seeing no other questions, we'll move on to agenda item 7, Superintendent's Report.
So I have some items here that I just wanted to go through and also just make sure you're aware. So the first one is the enrollment and staffing update. Second is leave of absence guidelines. A little update on the teacher evaluation system pilot update. And then last is just a little bit of an update where we are with the safety summit. Again, it was on there last time. I just want to kind of point you there. So back up to the top on enrollment and staffing update. You have both, and again, remember that this data changes quite regularly, although not significantly. You know, we have ins and outs all year long. This represents obviously kind of where we currently are this year and are projected for next year, with the allocation of resources that we have approved in our current budget. For the entire district, we do have 2 contingency teachers in the budget, and part of my dialogue with the principals, I did meet with the elementary principals today as we looked at enrollment and where are we at with kind of our thinking. Important to note, I did not meet with the middle school or the high school principal, but important to note, and I made that apparent to the elementary folks, is that the contingent teacher could also apply into the middle school or the high school based on either sections or increased needs as well. On the elementary configuration, you see it's broken down in by school, Central on the top, Chamberlain in the middle, Orchard on the bottom, and then a full district roll-up. Areas currently with the allocated resources that were in a watch, we have recently done another round of kindergarten registration. And so these numbers represent pretty solidly, you know, our current registration. However, we know many moms, dads, and guardians don't register until the very end. So there's some variability here still. This particular grade, I don't think this is new to you, board members, but there's some pretty significant volatility that can exist here, particularly with kindergarten. So as far as a quick overview and a watch right now, Again, we can move some of these classroom teachers around, but Brent Kuhn at Central has kind of allocated his 19 teachers in the following way that you see. This particular configuration, obviously, we have some, what I'm going to say, watch on kindergarten right now with 3 teachers there at 18.3. At Chamberlain, again, we've kept them at 15. And again, their distribution of resources currently, again, I would say there's a little bit of a watch at K as well. And the 20, again, Holly can reallocate those resources a little bit, but the grade 2, she's quite confident about, given, the students and that. So we feel we're pretty solid there as well. At Orchard, again, we kept them at 22 teachers. And Mark and his staff feel pretty confident where we are with staffing levels currently there. So that's the elementary. At the middle school, again, I haven't gone into a huge amount of detail. Again, they have 8 core teachers per each grade, and you can see where that's at. One area of particular watch is, again, as we continue to move the 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, one of the areas that I want to be sensitive to is looking at when and if, when the island students have choice in 2019 and 20, what that will do to the 6th grade. That would be the current 6th grade population that would be moving up. So we need to be watchful of that. And then at the high school, again, Patrick and his team, as you know, have students sign up for courses, and students, I want to say, and obviously our students can speak to this, they don't take the easy road, most of them. They're actively scheduled all the way through their senior years, and as a result, then, Patrick and his team fill up those schedules. Obviously, if there's low enrollment, then they may discontinue, but again, this is the staffing that he has. Again, I think it's important to note, sometimes the high school is a big entity, but when you look at their class averages and the ratios with their teachers is where it is. So that's where we are in enrollment. Let me listen to you on any questions that you have specific to enrollment or what I've reported.
Just on the high school, there's, this year confirmed you have tuition students, I think, broken out as a separate group and pulled out of each individual grade, is that?
That's correct, Steve. They're actually calculated within the grades, and we don't show that total number. We know that right now we're at just under 200, although that is that's also a pretty significant moving target as well for us.
It's just if, for example, if I take 11th grade confirmed this year at 267, and then if I'm right, do I roll it forward to the 206 in grade 12 next year? Or am I reading that wrong?
Confirmed this year, then it would roll to that. That's correct. And part of that is just the migration of the students, I suppose. I don't know.
But the 206 includes tuition students.
That's what I'm looking at.
That 167 looks low to me.
Well, yeah, it looks like the projected is taking that 173 and spreading them back out amongst
correct.
there. Okay.
That's correct.
All right.
That's correct. Thanks
Okay.
again. So I would much rather actually have it
You say, wow, that's a
identified or
joke.
broken out to the right. The way this was reported for me this year
Sort of
was
an apple
embedded
and
the
orange,
173 or the number back in.
Okay.
So it's hard to look to apples here on that. Yeah.
When we look at students per teacher, that includes the tuition students, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
So currently, just on contingency allocation, again, with the elementary principals, actually, we have an admin meeting tomorrow morning as well, all administrators. And so one of the things we're clear about is where as we progress towards the end of the year, we obviously have some decisions to make around teacher placement as well. The latest we can do any sort of redistribution of teachers is July 15th. That said, if we do anything, it's likely going to be adding, most likely. And if we do that, then we obviously need to be making timely decisions, because we do send out information to our parents around where they're placed. That either happens at Orchard, it happens a little bit earlier, and the other two schools a little bit later, closer to the start of the school year. But it's really important that we do that in a timely way that doesn't undo something that we've recently sent to moms and dads and guardians around the placement, so.
Okay. Any other questions on enrollment or?
Just an editorial comment, David. I think particularly with the elementary school, understanding how dynamic this is, I don't know if you could have more optimally allocated the teachers to balance out the class sizes. And I think that's a pretty darn good job. And my first grader's in one of those big, 20 and a half classes at Chamberlain. So I think you guys, you and your principals did a really good job with this.
Yeah, it is, I appreciate that, Steve. It is a moving target, and again, that area of watches right now, as I said, central school kindergarten is an area that we're wanting to watch. Also, it's not also just about the pure number, because, classroom teachers will tell you that, that they've had 14 kids in their class, and it's been very difficult, very, very difficult sometimes accommodating. And then in some cases, they've had the upper level limits, and it's been, a very different experience. But anyway, so there's a lot of complexity in that. So leave of absence guidelines, I think you have that as well. And so this is part of a much greater, we have a whole series of things around leaves, and family medical leave, for instance, is part of this. I just kind of cut and pasted this and gave you this particular piece. So a little bit about what the employee, obviously has to do. They have to make a written request. I generally, anytime there's a request made, I don't think generally, I always do confer with the principal on particulars about the request. We want to be clear about what the type of leave that's needed, and then any considerations that might go into making that decision. Obviously, you can imagine if somebody's just starting out, their experience with us and is asking for a year's leave 1 month into their employment, I think you would likely understand what the recommendation would be in that particular case. And so we have some general parameters on the consideration. The return to work, obviously, that's in there because it's a lot of specific to a lot of our family medical leave and responses that we need to do in that regard. And then the last column is responsibilities and our approvals. This is, again, where the board comes in, because you're the only group that can grant those. Obviously, you look to me for some guidance there, and so some of the areas that I evaluate is, what has been the allocation of leave requests in the past. Reasons for the leave, obviously, is an important component. The length of time that's being requested, obviously, if it's for multiple years, that's obviously not something that we do. Ability to find a replacement or to maintain acceptable level of service to students in the district, really important. Again, sometimes those are tough. As I said, length of service, which is a little repetitive back from the beginning, and then their desire and want to return. I think a big part of this is, if it's professional growth, then we're looking at what would be the deliverables returning back to the district. If somebody's going to go off and into a different community of learners, they're going to spend some time doing whatever, then obviously, that's a pretty important part of the leave. In some cases, the leave could be also for, family-related reasons as well. Again, important to note here that this leave, although you see extended in sabbatical would come with a financial, paying for them. And, we have not done one of those in I don't know, never in my tenure. Obviously, we've done a fair amount of leave requests, and you've been part of some of those in the recent past. So,
There's a couple questions. So is this in policy somewhere? Is this just for the board?
protocols.
So is this something that can be made available to teachers if it's not already available?
Well, sabbatical leave has been part of the collective bargaining
Yeah, but the
agreement.
extended leave I'm talking about.
Specifically, your question is what, Martin? Can
Well-
they,
I mean, is it well-known that this is the protocol? And if it isn't, I would think it should, number one. And number two is type of leave needed. I think that this language for leave greater than 1 year may be allowable, needs to be changed. That, I mean, I don't know exactly the language that should be used, but it's highly unlikely that we're going to approve more than 1 year. It hasn't been our precedent. We don't think it's a good idea to leave a spot open for 2 years, et cetera. That, I mean, I think that that language, and we can figure out what the language is, needs to be changed.
this is really my guidance. You know,
Right,
obviously,
right, right. No, I
it's in
understand.
my court, you know, for me making decisions. And then I have the obligation to bring it to you around whether it warrants,
But
you
I
know,
think it'd be,
appropriateness.
I understand it, but I think it'd be very helpful for teachers to understand if they're gonna be taking leave and they're planning on doing more than 1 year, that it's highly unlikely that we're going to grant them a second year.
Yeah. I mean, I have not widely dispersed these procedures. I think it's widely understood, though. I think it's widely understood because we've had people who've exercised the request for a variety of reasons. And I think it's widely understood that it wouldn't be for more than 1 year. We have had a long track record of people who have requested for a variety of reasons, and they have exercised the question, you know, to ask for another year, and we've been pretty clear on saying the no. They obviously always have the opportunity to come to the board and make that a more formal request. Obviously, if I was granting it, I can't grant it without your permission, so that's why you see them. If they want to contest my decision, they can always bring it to the board, and actually, I don't know that anyone's done that in the recent past either.
Well, we have to grant the even 1 year too, as well, right?
You have to grant all leaves.
Yeah.
You have to grant all leaves. I'm just saying, if I'm denying, again, based on administrative feedback or my own kind of protocols, you wouldn't get those unless somebody is going to contest that. Yeah. So I think part of this, Martin, is that we are discussing it tonight, which I think can be a little bit more transparent to staff and teachers. And I certainly will talk with the administrators around how, I really don't want to over-publicize, you know, this. Obviously, it's an administrative decision and ends up being yours if you're going to grant it. So certainly extended leaves have been more exercised, sabbatical leave, and I don't know, I think it's been more than, I don't know, Patrick, do you have any idea? You've been here for a little longer than me.
Teacher sabbatical not paid, like we've had the Rowan Foundation fund a number of sabbaticals.
Yeah.
What amount to fellowships or sabbaticals, but the district hasn't funded a sabbatical in over 20 years.
Yeah,
And I would just say that actually there's contractual language
right.
that talks about 1 to 2 year leaves and some other pieces in the written notification to the board. So it's right in the contract what the teacher's rights are in terms of asking or applying for leave of absence.
So, and again, both of those things I got to you late. I apologize that I didn't make it in your packet initially. So anyway, those are there. So the next up, and again, I want to move along here, teacher evaluation system and pilot update. It's also in your packet. And I'll let Stuart kind of give you a quick overview and then allow you to answer some questions, ask some questions.
So basically, as you can see, I wrote a quick summary of what has gone on this year in our attempt to move forward and put this to bed, you know, and have our final evaluation piece. Besides that, I just wanted to share, I have some quotes from some of the people who have participated this year. I'm happy to provide feedback about my supervision evaluation cycle this year. I think there's a benefit to the carefully planned formal observation with pre and post conference and all the other parts, as it really does allow us to put our best foot forward and show our best self. However, the 10-minute observation adds an equally valuable component in that it allows for real-time observation and feedback and challenges teachers to be open to feedback on all aspects of their instruction. It's been nice to have your feedback on snippets of time that aren't necessarily planned. This is a different one, down to the minute, like a formal observation, but lessons in real time. It seems more genuine, maybe. And then one more, I really enjoyed participating in the 10-minute observations this year. In my opinion, these brief visits provide a much more authentic picture of my teaching than a formal lesson, often much more care and attention into the planning of the lesson when we know it's going to be observed by the principal. The feedback I get after 10-minute visits is more valuable to me as it applies to my, quote, regular, end of quote, teaching, and not just a lesson that's been planned using specific format. So, as I say in this report, we are now, as an administrative team, discussing this feedback, and our plan is to formalize that. Either we'll have formal evaluations, 5 informal and a formal, I think, is leading as this pilot was, so that we can put this in place and have it clear what our plans are. So if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you, Stuart.
One quick question.
Yep, Martin.
So the 3 formal observations for new teachers, does that mean 3 formal in one year? Is that what that?
That's what happens
Okay.
right now.
All right,
Yes.
thanks.
And I'm trying to recall how this tied back to the work that was done.
It was
4
part of the
years ago?
revisions that we started to make, and we had looked and we had moved forward with some of the recommendations from the
Sarah Denny
piece. But
report.
during that piece, if you remember, I reported that we went to Vermont Principal Association, saw Kim Marshall, who's about 10 informal observations, and we did a study last year of the Kim Marshall work in order to move forward to make sure that we were having authentic and real evaluation that would be meaningful for the teachers and accomplish what the goals are in terms of supervision evaluation.
And from a time perspective, well, actually, it's probably premature because you're discussing it, so. Okay. Any other questions?
And then last, I wanted to just give you a quick update on the South Burlington School District Safety Summit. I don't know exactly that that's going to be called. We'll talk about that on Friday, but Alex, Arnell, myself, Elizabeth, and I've invited Rob Evans and Krista Chambers. We'll be meeting on Friday at 9 o'clock. I think that's right? 9 o'clock? To just talk about the plan for that. Our initial ideas, just, and please feel free to jump in, folks, was really to give kind of an update where we are, what we're thinking about, what we're struggling with, and also have the opportunity to listen to the community, ask specific questions, and really allow that to be a give and take conversation that could inform our work. I did invite Krista Chambers, mostly because I need some assistance, and it was a smart move to delegate a little bit so we can get it organized and planned. We haven't really talked specifically about the date. That will also be part of our work, but we'd like to get it in, I think, at this point. We're probably looking at the first part of May to see if we could get it in. And obviously, Arnell and Alex would be a big part of kind of the student voice for us, that we think will be really important and informative to everyone who attends. I don't know if you had anything else to add, but.
No, I look forward to Friday.
Yeah, right.
All right, anything else? All right, we'll move on to agenda item 8, staff voice mechanism. And I guess I bear the responsibility for that weird name. Let me preface this by saying this came up in discussion of future agenda items relative to the feedback that I know Bridget and I were getting and other candidates were getting during the election process this year around the opportunities that staff, whether it's support staff, teachers, administrators, central office folks, have to provide feedback and input to the board in particular. So we did have a brief discussion when we added this to the agenda about the current mechanisms, obviously through building administrators and through staff meetings, through regular board meetings like this that are open to the public, through emails, and our phone numbers are available on the district website, through the superintendent, and through largely the public comment session of every regular board meeting agenda. But this was the opportunity for the board to talk about, did we want to be thinking about, in the broadest sense, a different kind of staff voice mechanism? So I'll open it up for board feedback.
I think we had talked about a few different potential ideas, and so maybe we can sort of throw those back out there, and if anyone has others, and we can sort of discuss those potential ones. So one was the potential for some sort of council, that would have sitting members on it that would collect input and feed that to us. And another was potentially something similar to our student representatives, to have someone in a non-voting role be, a member of the school board in a non-voting role, as I said. Those were the two main other ideas I think that we had discussed or sort of thrown out. I don't know what anyone thinks of those two.
And you're thinking the council would be structured similar to like the Citizens Finance Advisory Group?
Yes, like the Citizens Budget Advisory Group. And so we could take issues to them on like regular issues, like the budget, because it would be great if we had more voice on the budget during that process, or other significant issues if we felt like we needed feedback. And this would be sort of a group that would be already formed, so it would sort of circumvent the whole process of having to form a group every time we wanted to get feedback on a particular issue. And then, obviously, if either mechanism would allow for teachers, or staff, if there is an issue that is really pertinent to them that they feel like we're not addressing, that needs to be addressed at a board level, as opposed to a building administrator level or at a superintendent level, that they could bring that directly to us and have a clear mechanism to do that.
Any other thoughts?
Well, I think one thing we want to make sure that we are cognizant of is that we're policy governance, and we really depend to go through the superintendent and having the direct feedback from the teachers kind of to some extent could circumvent that. So I don't know if the council works as, that seems to be a little more problematic in that scheme.
Mm-hmm.
I feel that having, somebody attending as a non-voting member of the board would be something, though, for some reason, I don't find that as problematic. But I guess the main thing is, is this something we want to speak with the teachers' representatives about what they think would be an approach?
Well, it's obviously,
not just
staff is not
union,
just
right, it's
teachers,
true,
but
right.
I don't know what the board's pleasure will be, but maybe I can turn to David, and do you have any reaction or thoughts on those types of venues?
Well, and I think there are some examples out there. It might be, a suggestion might be, to reach out to Vermont School Boards Association and to other policy governance boards. Reach out to them, number one, and ask, as well as policy governance boards that are operating, and if they're doing, what are they doing about additional, voice from staff? Again, I think a lot of, I don't know this for a fact, but a good many of them have, boards have student representatives. And I think the construct of that is really good, particularly in being a board that is listening to kind of the pulse from the board meeting perspective on some of the things that are happening within the district. So I could see it being an effective arm. But I would first, look to seek some guidance and some direction from Vermont School Boards Association and kind of go from there. I'm sure there's some, unintended consequences sometimes too that, whether it's schedules or, I don't know what those potentially could be. I'm not thinking there's a lot of them, but we probably should just ask that question.
One question I have for Arnell and Alex is how you really, what mechanisms the ones that you use most often to gather student feedback before you come to us with issues or concerns or topics, because there's not really a teacher's or a staff council in the way that there's a student council. There aren't sort of these other bodies really where they gather to provide input. And I don't know how useful those are, or how you're gathering input that you bring to board meetings with you.
That's funny because the other day in AP Psych, we literally devoted a whole day to talking about this, and we talked about, our teacher asked us, because we were talking about stress and where students go to when they have stress, because the way, it's constructed right now is the teachers are there for us, and if we have an issue or problem, we can go to our advisor or a teacher we really trust. But what we were talking about was how many students actually do that, and we closed our eyes and he asked how many people actually feel comfortable with a teacher that they would go to, and out of a class of 20, only 7 said. So aside from that, there isn't really, I know there's student council where we talk about things, but aside from that, when it comes to actual specific issues, I don't think students really have a specific mechanism that they go to or whatever. Not that has really been a huge issue, but, obviously I don't think students are gonna go to a teacher, and aside from that, most of their problems they'll probably take care of. So.
Yeah, in terms of receiving feedback as a student representative board member and getting the status or sense of what other students feel or think about certain issues, I mean, I would speak for the both of us in saying that we communicate with students directly, or we just overhear conversation. We even through social media, just overall keeping a pulse on how students are feeling, and usually these will, if it is an important issue, we'll have class discussions about it, as you were saying too. But it's pretty, we just seek out opportunities to not just ask directly, ask students directly, but also keep a general awareness of the school environment and culture.
Yeah, and I know recently, with all the sort of things that have been going on, I've been talking to a bunch of different people and have been bringing it up to the board and will. So I know just recently a lot of students are gonna be, presenting to the board, but I don't know, by issues, if you mean more personal or
No, I mean more
school.
things that would come to the board. So things that you guys have brought up, that you want us to address, or that you want us to think about, or you want us to be aware about, how you go about gathering those. Yeah.
I know in our school, our students are very open to the administration, and I always hear people, they had a meeting with Mr. Burke, so I don't know if it's like that with teachers, but I know the administration we're comfortable with them.
Yeah, I think this is didn't mean to interrupt if you weren't done or not, but, I think the students is who we're here for, and, I think to the exact point that Arnell brought out is that anything we can do to enhance that communication collection for you is important. I feel less driven by staff, I think staff, we have many, many opportunities from colleague to colleague, administrator to administrator, and so I feel like we currently have a lot of avenues available to staff. And I think your avenues too, if there's questions that they have that they're not happy, there's avenues to access the board. And so, I do think that the work of us is students, and I think it's really nice to have their voice present for you. It is in part policy governance, I think, and again, I'd still want to seek, the feedback, but I think there's a lot of mechanisms currently in place to receive feedback from our staff.
Well, and that's a good point. There are a lot of mechanisms. I think some of the reason this made it on to an agenda is that maybe the outcome is just to reinforce all the mechanisms there are.
Yeah.
But maybe as a follow-up, if the board is in agreement, we can contact the VSBA and kind of look at benchmarking other practices. Would the VPA have any additional information on that?
I don't think they would be.
Not the same.
Not the same. I think if anything, you'd get some guidance on the positives and also,
Well, like current practice, too.
yeah. So I think it would be mostly VSBA. Patrick, you have any, Patrick sits on the VPA board.
I understand what the problem the board's trying to solve with this conversation is. So I don't really know how to respond.
Yeah, I don't know that it's a problem, but some of the feedback that was coming through the election process this year was that there was a sentiment that there wasn't staff voice. And I don't know if you want to clarify that more than relative to the board. And some of our previous discussion really highlighted all of the avenues to get feedback to the board that includes, through building administrators, through the superintendent, through access to emails and phone, and even these public meetings. We always have comments from the public. But so some of it may be just reinforcing all the avenues that are available right now. But do you want to elaborate? Because you were on the receiving end of a lot of
and I
that
think
feedback.
it was sort of more, it was bubbling up that certain members of the community or certain teachers felt like we were unaware of sort of the impact of our decisions or our actions, and that there was a desire for sort of a clear line of communication with the board about that. And yeah, I mean, it was really just us sort of being shouted at here and there. Not exactly shouted at, but it felt a little shouty that maybe some of our decisions, we were sort of unaware about, how our processes and our decision-making was impacting things directly in the classroom. And that we were so far removed from that perhaps we needed more perspective on what's going on in the classroom.
And I looked at it a little bit differently in that, I mean, we've got an incredible pool of resources in our student population. I look at the pool of resources we have with our entire staff, administrators included, that as a board member, I know I would welcome feedback and on both the giving and receiving side of that. But there's also a lot of avenues for that now, and maybe the real end goal is to make sure people know those channels are open and encourage folks to use them.
Perhaps. We're sitting and looking at, master plan and visioning, which we're going to talk about more tonight. That's an example of a place where, unless we develop a formal survey or we go out and actually, we had people work on the master plan and visioning task force previously, but we're at a different stage now and we're focused on slightly, different issues. There's no sort of sitting body or mechanism for us to really gather that information except through you, which is great, but it becomes a sort of game of telephone about, just what is the sentiment. And so, for example, one of the questions I asked the other day when we were in subcommittee meeting on master planning and visioning was, we're sort of coming to the end of phase 1 of the study of the middle school and high school. And phase 2 really revolves around sort of mapping out options for what we would do at the middle school and high school. I really feel there needs to be this interim discussion of where we want to go with curriculum, programming, and those kinds of things. And we have an administrative perspective on that, and we have some of the work that was done previously. But my question was, how big is this gap from where we are now to where we want to be in terms of what we're offering in the classroom? And I think that's one example of a situation where it would be nice to have a resource that's there who's already raised their hand and said, I would be willing, or this group of us would be willing to provide that feedback sort of on an ongoing basis as we go through big processes like this. So that's where this discussion was coming from.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think we could certainly ask, again, I don't want to be the policy governance police, that's not generally who I am, but, I think these are places where you're into sticky wickets a little bit around that. And again,
I sense the discomfort, and I completely understand that there would need to be some very clear boundaries about it and all of that, but.
And so I do think, one of the things that is foundational here. It's about communications, and in part, we're trying to continue to, to improve that through, obviously, in this past budget, we've got some communication support that will come along. And that may, again, my desire is, of course, I have a lot, many more plans than actually are probably doable, so we got to make those calibrated together, but so that we're celebrating and informing students, obviously staff, teachers, and informing parents, and one of those arms is in community around some of the happenings that are occurring. And, I looked at the city has done they brought somebody on, and obviously they've been working at getting that message out, and I think that's probably an avenue that encompasses some of what we're trying to do. Because any one staff member or two additional may not be still enough. And I think, to your point, Elizabeth, it's looking at what are the systems that are currently in play, and how can we make sure people are aware and we're driving them to those locations. So again, I want to be clear. There's always at times of conflict, there's people who always want more, but there's also, people also need to be motivated to seek out information too, whether you're a staff or a community member. And again, we have people who are generally watching us on an ongoing basis. I don't know how many we have on the Twitter feed tonight, but that's been upwards of 100 in the last couple of meetings that we've had. And, we have people that make an effort to come to board meetings too, to help that happen. So again, I'm happy to do a little bit more of a deeper dive and ask the question, see what we get back.
So we'll circle back with the VSBA. Any comments from the public? All right, seeing none, we will move on to agenda item 9, master planning and visioning.
So I wanted to first, again, we're gonna walk into phase 1, as Bridget already spoke about. We're gonna hear a report here in just a bit. I wanted to give you a little bit of an update under the master planning and visioning work, specifically directed from the board to me. One area that we're working on is sound insulation at Chamberlain. So I just want to give you a brief little update on where we are. Two things. There's a lot going on. Two things I want to highlight. One is that we're doing sound testing at Chamberlain. Sound testing is being done by the same organization that has done a lot of our hazardous, any air testing, any of that. And they have concluded 2 days. Last week they did 2 days of sound testing. They're doing it very methodically, and they have done it. They have outside testing, outside recess, inside closed classroom, inside open classroom, and then also on a person. And they've done that now 2 days, and we do not yet have any data back. They'll be doing one more day next week, and then they'll be working on the finality of that report. What we'll get back will be likely different measurements than what we've received to date from the FAA. The FAA measures their sound in what they call DNL, or day-night noise level, decibels, which are averaged over a 24-hour period. What we're going to get back will be more kind of the incidental noise decibel levels. And so I think it's important that people will have to, we'll have to quantify that again when the report comes out around that. So in addition to the sound testing, we also have another thing going on around that's a request to the FAA, or what I'll say to the Burlington International Airport, and also to the FAA to begin immediate soundproofing of Chamberlain. We, back in the day, 2015, qualified under the noise compatibility program. We qualified for sound insulation then, and I think as we've looked into the data and the information, we've been now diligent around pushing that, and we've been pushing through both the airport and the FAA, asking for that immediacy. Today, actually, I got a response back. So to Burlington International Management credit, they've been very responsive in correspondence back to me. They not necessarily have responded with the actual occurrence of sound insulation, although today we did, on behalf of the Burlington International Airport, they submitted a grant to the FAA, and it sounds like things are moving quite quite positively. Just paraphrasing a few things here, the eligibility sound study, once funded, could occur quickly. And so they've submitted and they've gotten some initial feedback from the FAA that sounds pretty likely to occur. In the final, again, this is from Nick Longo. He did speak to the FAA today, kind of to what I just said, and that they are reviewing the application this week. While I can't say for sure when the grant would be approved, it reassures me that they have the application and are reviewing it. If I hear anything back, they'll let us know. So that's some, I think really important information. And I know it's important to us to make sure that people, community, are aware of what we're doing. So I don't know specifically. I know Steve sat on the Technical Advisory Committee, and the last meeting, the outcome of that was to put that committee on pause, pending a more immediate response to update the noise exposure map, or what they call the NEM mapping. And so that currently is also underway. They will then bring back the Technical Advisory Committee group to help then advise and direct along the way. So for us, that's a brief update. The last thing I'll say is I did get a public records request. I want to say late last week from the Burlington Free Press, and really asking for any and all correspondence specific to the work that's going on with the FAA and the Burlington National Airport, including the results of the sound study. I do not have the sound information, and obviously we're working to comply to provide them with a correspondence specific to that. So that's where we are to date. Obviously, there's a fair amount of anxiety in the building around the instrumentation, although a letter went home to parents through Holly. Classroom teachers have been extremely supportive, even though the day that we did the testing, the Windows Open one classroom was a little bit of a challenge because it was just slightly below 32 and it was blowing, so it wasn't the easiest situation. The students and the staff were troopers and have been really positive. I know you have a question.
Yes.
Actually, I just wanted to let everybody know that David came also to the fourth grade. We're doing a sound unit, and he did a great presentation. He taught fourth grade classes to go along with our sound unit. He drew diagrams on the board. He did a great job teaching, telling them all about the equipment and stuff.
Yeah, thanks, Cindy.
And it was real-time learning with what we were doing in science.
Yeah, and I was amazed. They actually could provide a great overview of some of the different sound, hertz and decibels, and they were great, and some really, really good work going on. So I don't know what questions board members have specific to that.
Yeah, so for the days that the testing was done, did we get the good fortune of having F-16s taking off on that day?
So, again, part of the assessment, it's important that we get the full gamut of that. And so commercial traffic was recorded, the departing traffic, inbound traffic, and any activity at the airport, including the F-16s. And yes, everything was flying.
So that was a day that they were taking off?
Everything was flying on the 2 days tested, yeah.
Okay, great.
And the Air Guard has been very supportive as well, around flight schedules, as well as the commercial traffic. Obviously, it's published, including we also, the ATC staff were listening to departure, communications with verifying, who was taking off. I gave them a little bit of help. Being a pilot, I gave them a little bit of help and kind of some summaries of determining where they're going and what they're doing. And so I think they've got a good 2-day sample so far.
Okay, thank you.
Any other board questions? Questions from the public? All right.
And the last part of that, Elizabeth, is just the committee work update. And I know we've been really fortunate for both Martin and Bridget to be part of that subcommittee group. And John Stewart, who is also with us tonight because he's been helping me out on the master planning and visioning. We have a scheduled meeting for the 30th, which is Monday, the 30th, is that right? And we moved that back to a morning meeting time. And so I think that works for all three of you. It doesn't work for me because I'm part of an away meeting. So I'll work with John. You know, I may be able to be reached, but I'm with a group and probably going to be tied up for most of that morning. So anyway, that's the only thing I wanted to report on the committee stuff.
All right. Seeing no questions, we will move on to agenda item 10. It looks like we're getting set up here.
Yep. So let me just start with a brief introduction, but obviously John Stewart is no stranger to the group. John has been helping me with components of master planning and visioning. He's joined here tonight by also with Rob Fitzgerald from Dore Whittier, and Dore Whittier was part of the Phase 1 analytics specific to mechanical, structural, and electrical. Some of the subcommittee, both Martin and Bridget, have had some preview of this report, but tonight is, again, in no way, shape, or form giving you the full report. It's giving you a snapshot of the report and also then seeking some additional direction. As Bridget also said, Phase 2, which would begin effective July 1, is also a big part of kind of the follow-up to the high school, middle school kind of needs assessment. I will tell you that when we look at some of the numbers, those of you who haven't seen it, or some of you have, you know, they're pretty concerning, pretty high. You can put the adjective in there, but they're pretty high. That said, you know, I think it will be informative to you. So without further ado, welcome, Rob, and Elizabeth and I will need to step away for a second. Welcome, and you got the floor.
Thank you. I don't know if I need the microphone. I'm good here.
I think you'll be okay. We might want to, has that got a long enough cord? Let's just pull this over a little bit closer. I think you'll be all right.
Okay, thanks. So thanks, my name is Rob Fitzgerald, I'm with Dore Whittier Architects. Tonight we'll be reviewing Phase 1 of a master planning study. So tonight it will be site and building assessments. I'll give this presentation, and at the end, you know, there'll be time for comments or questions and that sort of thing. And just make sure my So tonight we'll go over the process that we went through on in the study that we completed. We'll go over the schedule. We'll review the site and building assessment for each of the buildings, the capital improvement plan, and then our next steps. Oops. So Phase 1 is really the physical building itself. We brought in a team of architects and engineers. We looked at the exterior of the building, the roof, the mechanical, electrical, plumbing, structural systems, civil site work. Prepared a capital improvement plan where we took all of the items that we reviewed and placed them into a spreadsheet, and developed some priorities and cost estimates for each one. Phase 2, which is the second part of the master plan, is planning, I believe, to be done this summer, and that would review the educational aspects. And that process, you know, evaluates the actual spaces themselves and how the spaces work or don't work with the teaching and learning that's happening there. It also includes a look at enrollment projections, strategic planning, and develops a series of options and then cost estimates. And through that process, it's much more about how the spaces within the building function, whereas Phase 1, which we'll be reviewing tonight, is really just looking at the infrastructure and the building itself. So for Phase 1, you can see here we started back in November. with a kickoff meeting. We came to the site with our team of architects and engineers, gathered all of the existing drawings and past studies that have been done. We walked through the building, spent time going through each of the two buildings, going up on top of the roof, going into the boiler room, going through each of the spaces throughout both buildings. Put together a report where we documented everything with photographs and narrative. And then we also looked at, just general overall capacity. And then we put together this capital improvement plan where we took all of the recommendations and put them into the spreadsheet, like I mentioned, prioritized them in cost estimates. And that happened over March. This was done by an independent cost estimator, professional cost estimator that is experienced in schools. And tonight, we're giving this presentation. We should have the final report within the next few days. So starting off with the South Burlington High School, we're looking at a total of approximately 151,000 square feet. The original building was done in 1960 with renovations and additions in 1977 and 78. It's grades 9 through 12, and the current enrollment is approximately 942 students. When we look at the floor plans, the area in white is the original 1960 building. The areas in yellow are the 1977 to 78 additions. And in 1995, or more or less, there was a modular building added to the rear over here. So just to orient you, this is the main entrance here. This is the auditorium. This is the library. Gym is over here. So starting off with the landscape and civil assessment, we're looking at approximately 80-acre total site of both properties, both facilities. 23 acres of that 80 is wetlands, which is mostly in this back part of the site back here. People don't typically notice that when they're out here in the fields. They just see trees, but in behind all of that are all of these wetlands. And approximately 9.5 acres of impervious surface, which is essentially asphalt pavement and roofing. So just looking at the site circulation at the high school, one of the things that we looked at was the fact that the bus loop is very short. For the number of students that go to school here, this is not a very large area for queuing in buses. The other thing we noticed is that the parent drop-off is fairly close, and it also comes in at the same location. And it also has a short queuing area. And then you have student and visitors that come and go out of this parking area. And so there's a little bit of congestion right in this area here. So you can see all of the traffic buildup there.
Students are nodding their head.
Yeah. And there's also confusion for visitors. As a visitor coming in, you don't really know where to go. Do I go down here? Do I take a right? Is this just student parking? Where do the visitors park? And so there's just a general sense of confusion and congestion. Looking at some other items on the site, while these are labeled as handicap accessible spaces, they are missing signage. And out of 159 spaces, we require 6. 5 of them were shown, but only 1 of them is actually fully compliant. So again, clarifying and identifying visitor and short-term parking, and then an annual inspection of catch basins. Here you can see in this photo, this is just again showing the kind of the proximity of the bus and the parent drop-off area. So moving on to structural, overall, the building is structurally very sound. It's done a nice job of, it's held up well. A few of the things that we observed, there are a few locations of differential settlement. This is very minor. It's nothing significant to worry about. These exterior hollow steel columns, they're actually filled with concrete, and we've noticed some cracking at the top, and so water's been kind of getting in and then rusting out the bases. These are primarily cosmetic columns, so they're not really holding up a substantial portion of the building, but it is something to look at and address in the future. And then one of the other significant pieces is in the 1977 wings at the library and at the other wing at the other end of the building on the south end. We noticed that at the corners in particular, this plane here has shifted a little bit. You can see there's a little bit of a gap. I don't know with the lighting here if you can see that, but again, it's nothing. It's nothing to be concerned about in terms of immediate action, but it is something to address in the future. It appears that this was likely a result of this band of windows that comes across and then meets this control joint, so it's a weak corner condition. Moving on to the mechanical system, overall, again, it's in great working condition, very well maintained, and that's something that we would say throughout both buildings. Actually, is that both buildings are and have been very well maintained. I know that sometimes it's easy to through this process of showing. I mean, this is our job, right? We're here to look at all the bad things that are happening with the building and identifying them. But there are actually a lot of really good things that the school district has done. And we really highly commend the maintenance staff, Bart Maselli and his staff on, this is, almost 300,000 square feet between these two buildings alone of area that to be maintained. And, with these buildings being at this vintage, it's expected, that you're going to have aging equipment and materials. So anyway, moving on to the air handling system. So, as you can imagine with a building of this vintage, it's difficult to incorporate a building-wide replacement of the entire mechanical system and include that in your annual budget. And so what we found is, that the school district has been addressing things as they come up. As things, either break down or are nearing, the end of their life by failing, they've been replaced. And so we found a wide variety of ages of equipment ranging from 2 years old to 58 years old. There is like this, for example, this is a pneumatic compressor. So the controls system that controls the mechanical system is all by this pneumatic, air compressor that feed the controls. So, that's one of the recommendations is to upgrade the controls because it's an obsolete system. The HVAC system for the auditorium, gym, cafeteria, kitchen, library, and science wing are all in need of upgrades. Antiquated exhaust fans, and then the unit ventilators in each of the classrooms, that's a piece of mechanical equipment in each of the rooms. That mechanical equipment makes noise, and from our experience, it's an antiquated system. We don't install those in new schools today. One of the reasons is that now you have a piece of equipment that is in every single classroom. So, and each of them are all individual units that all need to be, have their parts and pieces replaced and upgraded. And then in addition to that, they make noise. They're much louder than a centralized ventilation system.
So what we found is that historically, sometimes the teacher will have trouble either hearing the students, or the students will have trouble hearing the teacher, and so sometimes they might shut off the ventilation system, which is not good. You want to have continuous ventilation being provided to the classrooms. Plumbing and fire protections. Portions of the 1977 editions were provided with fire protection or sprinkler systems. The original 1960 building does not. In all new construction, we provide sprinklers throughout the buildings. And if there was a significant renovation here, it would require the building to be fully sprinklered. This is a 22-year-old hot water heater. It's way oversized, and we would recommend that a new one be installed that would be independent of the boiler. So the boiler, anytime you need hot water, the boiler kicks on. You don't need that in the summertime or in the shoulder months. And then upgrading plumbing fixtures with water conserving types as you move on. Electrical, again, you've done a nice job of maintaining the systems. This is the original 1960 electrical panel coming into the building, designed at 3,000 amps. Today, you only use 400 amps. And the reason is that this was originally designed to with electric heat back when this was originally built. All of these panels are all obsolete. The manufacturers don't make these parts anymore. They're difficult to find. If you run into an issue, it's costly and difficult to find parts. There's no surge protection. The pad mount transformer is in need of an upgrade. There should be a backup power generator for the building. And the fire alarm system should be upgraded with additional devices. That's another component that gets tweaked and added to from time to time, but really the entire system is in need of an upgrade. And then a new comprehensive security system with cloud recording is recommended as well. Moving on to the exterior, again, maintained really well. But for example, the roofs are in need of replacement. This is a view of one of the classroom wings. As you can see, this is all ponding water. Back when it was originally designed, they didn't feel it was necessary to slope them to the drain. So this, oftentimes as the seams fail, may result in a leak. And I know that you had one wing of the building recently replaced, but really the rest of the roofs are in need of replacement as well. There's some cracking noted in a few spots, nothing significant, but again needing some repair. This is an example of some roof flashing that is in need of replacement when the roofing work is completed. Entrance door replacement and secure entrance to the school is very much needed. I know that the school district is planning to start at least a partial replacement of the entrance doors, the most exterior ones. That'll be happening over April break, I believe. But in terms of the bigger picture, an evaluation of how do people come into the building and how do they get signed in, and what's stopping them from moving on into the rest of the building, and having that whole kind of area looked at with in terms of the bigger picture, and what happens at the other entrances as well to the building. So that's all things that could happen in the phase 2 discussion of how the spaces actually function and how do the entrances work. And then the school has been replacing a large number of their windows. You can see here, the classroom wings are all, have been going through a process of window replacement for the last couple summers, I believe. But there are still some areas of the building that have single pane windows, like the cafeteria, for example. And then the 1977 windows, which had failed. The insulated glass units have some condensation in them, and they've got gaps around them. You can see here an attempt to fill in some with some insulation. On the interior of the building, the flooring varies quite a bit. Again, exceeding its lifespan. Some of this is all original flooring that we have in the building. Some sagging tiles and rusted grid. That's often a sign of inadequate ventilation. So you've got excess moisture and humidity in the space. Handicap accessibility improvements. Some of them have been made. For example, upgrading some of the bathrooms, adding the ramp and the elevator. Those are all excellent improvements. But there's still other areas. For example, the band rooms. These are all steps leading up here. There's no way that if you have an instrument, a person with a disability that plays an instrument in the back row, that they can get up in there. And there's also a number of other areas throughout other parts of the building that are not accessible or difficult to access. Original science lab equipment and casework as well, and the kitchen is in significant need of upgrade. All antiquated equipment, and not only that, but also the way that students come into the space and obtain their food. It's not like it was back in 1960, where students just come in with a tray and you get given some food and you go to the to the end of the line. The way that food is delivered today is much different. Typically you have different stations, different offerings, and you have a short window of opportunity for students to come in and get their lunch. So you can't have a line of 150 students all lined up in one single line. It's much more efficient if you have multiple stations. So the space isn't really designed for that. And again, that's something that gets reviewed in the next phase. Moving on to the middle school, we're looking at approximately 120,000 square feet, 1967 original building. There's been no new additions and no significant renovations to the middle school since original construction. Grades 6 through 8, approximately 555 students. So looking at the parking and bus loop and drop-off on this section of the site, you can see in yellow here, this is the way that the buses come in and loop around. And these orange arrows show the parent drop-off area. While these are longer queuing areas, one of the main issues here is that you have people going back and forth across this busy parking area. So you have buses and cars coming and going, and then people traveling across either from their cars to the building, or from one building to the other, or from this other parking space or parking area in the back here. So this creates a less than ideal condition for safety. One of the other things that we noticed here in this parking area, which is different than the other one, is that the condition of the pavement is in significant disrepair. There's ponding water, cracking, significant settlement in some areas, and it really needs to be not only just taken up, but the subgrade needs to be redone. I believe the school district did a project like that around this loop, and the same kind of thing needs to be done in this area. But this is, again, the type of thing that we wouldn't recommend be done until the end of phase 2 because you want to look again at the bigger picture, and that's the whole point of this whole master planning study, is to take a holistic approach to reviewing both buildings and how they function before you spend significant capital on fixing something that you might wish that you had thought about a little bit more and decided to reconfigure to make it work better. So this is just taking a step back from that and just looking at the larger site. The other component of this is that every time the buses come in, they come into the high school site and then come back onto Dorset Street, and then come into the middle school site and back out. And the same thing with the parents. So you have this loop of all this additional traffic that, if thought about a little bit further or possibly configured a little bit differently, might be able to avoid, these two high congestion entrances and additional traffic out there. Moving on to landscape. So, again, this is some photos of the different pavement conditions. This is a significant ponding here in the larger parking area. This is the north lot that just has stone and gravel. The surface drainage is very poor in both of these locations. Sidewalks around the parking and drop-off areas are in a variety of different conditions. There are also handicap accessibility non-compliance in a couple locations. Structurally, on the exterior, one of the observations we had walking around was that we noticed on this side of the building there's this horizontal crack. It's pretty long. It runs probably about 25 to 30 feet. And then while looking at the drawings, we found that it looks like it's likely from, there's a beam embedded into the wall here that may have had some freeze-thaw action and too close of proximity to the brick. So the brick just cracked right at that location where that steel is. And so this would involve some removal of the brick and putting in a control joint, a flexible joint there that can move. Again, nothing significant, but it's one of these things that we observed. Again, some settlement cracking. Again, nothing significant. Overall, the building is very sound structurally. But again, there are some cracking noted. Mechanical system overall is in very good working condition. Upgrading the controls here is also recommended. There's a pneumatic system on this building as well. I know the school district is planning to replace burners with this modulating burners, so that'll provide some excellent energy saving. And then any of the 50-year-old air handling equipment, exhaust fans, and so forth should be replaced. Plumbing and fire protection. There is a limited area sprinkler system, but a significant renovation will require that the rest of the building be fully sprinklered. There are some gate valves. Again, these are old valves, and a lot of these things, again, are just the fact that they've exceeded their lifespan. Typically, these mechanical, electrical, plumbing systems are designed to last 25 to 30 years, and we're looking at probably double that in some cases. Again, you've got some 1967 electrical distribution system components. There are a number of electrical improvements that are recommended there. Replacing emergency lighting, again, comprehensive security system, providing additional circuits where there could be some circuit breakers that are tripping. On the exterior of the building, The roofing is the big ticket item here. There's some significant ponding in some corners, and the roof penthouses, we call them penthouses, but they're big, just big pop-ups above the roof that contain the mechanical equipment. And they're severely rusted and deteriorated and need to be replaced. So it's a building-wide roofing replacement and penthouse replacement as well. Hollow metal framed windows and doors are deteriorating in a few locations. You can see kind of right here. This is a connection where they have the tall vertical windows. It's all hollow metal, and so over time, that metal rusts when it's exposed, particularly at the joints. And it's all one component, so it's difficult to break up apart. So really, the whole window system needs to be replaced. Here, you can see these panels that run around the building. This section was replaced when we did this elevator replacement here a couple years ago. And when we took this section out, it was filled with some fiberglass bat insulation, much of which was chewed up by squirrels. So there was different squirrel nests all in there, and that's what we would probably expect to see around the rest of the building. And there's no vapor barrier between that exterior metal panel and the inside of the building, so there's a lot of air infiltration coming into the building. So replacing these metal panels and insulating it properly and providing a vapor barrier would probably improve your electric bill, or your heating bill. Exterior brick repair and cleaning needed. So one of the things that we looked at was, again, this roof that we talked about needing a replacement. It's exceeded its lifespan, and this type of roof, back when this was installed, didn't have as much reinforcing as today's roofs do. And so these roofs shrank. And so you can see here it's pulling away at the edges, which here is pulling away at some of the brick even. So you can see some cracking occurring here, and this white that you see here is efflorescence, so it's salt that comes out of the brick when water gets in behind it. So it's water's getting in here and getting in behind the brick and then coming out. And so that's typically a sign that there's some water coming in. So again, this is an important component of upgrades to this building. On the interior, you can see some of the original VCT is a vinyl composition tile. So it's telegraphing uneven surfaces. So you can see when they come through with the scrubbers and so forth, you can see some variation there. And so again, replacing all of the flooring and leveling the existing concrete surface down would be part of that sort of replacement project. Here you can see some of the rusting. This is on an exterior wall here, so again, some moisture is traveling in through here. There's no thermal break at this particular location, so there's some excess moisture that's causing some rust there. Built-in casework is antiquated, in complete need of upgrade. This is all original. Same with the doors. The handicap accessibility, there's door clearance issues, access to this platform, toilet rooms, there's steps in some corridors, and so on. So just summarizing, solidly constructed buildings, maintained well. Really no significant renovations over the last 40 to 58 years and 51 years for the middle school. Again, I mean, it is a tribute to the maintenance department here that these buildings have stood up so well for this extended period of time. But it's just that The parts and pieces have exceeded their lifespan. Codes and regulations for fire safety, handicap accessibility, ventilation, energy efficiency, they've all changed over the last 40 to 58 years. As I mentioned, 25 to 35-year lifespan on building infrastructure. Safety and security is another area that, just in the last 10 to 15 years has changed dramatically in schools. And this capital improvement plan, it's a great first step. So kudos to the school district and the school board for making this a priority so that you can be proactive instead of reactive. So moving on to the capital improvement plan, I'll just kind of go through that a little bit. What is it? Well, it's recommendations that we've pulled out from our report, and we've put them into a spreadsheet. And it's a living, breathing document. So, we've plugged the information in there and took our best assessment of prioritizing them, working with the school district, identifying which ones we both thought should fall into the priority 1 or priority 2 or priority 3 categories. But that can be modified from year to year. You might decide some items, make more sense to move up to the head of the list, and other of my items might get pushed back. So it's a working document. And the numbers that we are showing here are just are their big picture budgets. These are based off of the limited information that we have. A description, a brief paragraph or description of scope of work based on our walkthrough of the buildings. They're not based on drawings or anything that we've prepared or anything like that. So they're really just intended to be ballpark, kind of big picture figures, and that once you are ready to move forward with a particular scope of work, another kind of mini assessment or mini study would be done on that particular scope of work, and so you can fine-tune your numbers before finalizing them. So what we did is we took all of our information through our different consultants and plugged them into 6 different categories: health, safety, and welfare, code compliance, handicap accessibility, maintenance or extending the life of the building, energy efficiency, and hazardous materials. So the health and safety and welfare, typically would fall into, the priority 1 type of conditions. Items that are affecting indoor air quality, like roof leaks, for example, any significant structural issues, security concerns, things like that. Code compliance, this is just items that, if you were to build the building today, which items wouldn't comply with your current code. That's not to say that you're required to upgrade everything by today's standard, because you're not. You fall under the existing building code, which you're only required to comply with the current code for the work that you do. So, and I can get into that more in a minute, but and depending on the amount of work that you do, could trigger other code compliance. Handicap accessibility, any of the items that fall into that category. Extending the life of the building, so deterioration of fixtures, finishes, building systems. Energy efficiency, things that could improve your annual energy bill. And then materials, hazardous materials, any materials that are in poor condition. The school has an ongoing management plan, but if there's anything that was considered in poor condition, or materials that might need to be abated over a period of time at the time of renovation or demolition. So some considerations, as I mentioned, handicap accessibility, structural upgrades, fire protection, energy code. Depending on the scope of work that you do, it may potentially trigger more requirements to upgrade that scope of work to today's code standards. So, for example, if you're replacing the lighting, you need to replace the lighting to today's standards. If you're upgrading your HVAC system, you have to upgrade them to today's standards and code requirements for ventilation and so on. If you're making some changing out a door or doing some renovations in a specific area, like let's say we did a renovation of this library, any of the work that's included in that renovation work, we would be required to upgrade to current code. If we decided to do a whole entire wing renovation, okay, now depending on how much scope that involves, that may trigger other upgrades like sprinkler system and so on. It all depends and it all varies depending on the scope of work that you're doing. So taking a look at the numbers, so here's a breakdown of the categories. So for the high school, here are the different categories I just talked about and how we've divided them up by priority. So, year one, we're looking at approximately 558,000. I shouldn't say year one, I should say priority one. Priority two, about 14.5 million. Priority three, 2.5. For a total of approximately 17.8. At the middle school, priority one, approximately 3.7, priority two, 8.6, and priority three, 1.3 for a total of 13.7 million. Again, this is with the eye of looking ahead to the next, 10, 20, 30 years. What types of things are in need of upgrades? And so breaking this down a little bit further, so this is just as an example, this is how the priority one items break down. And again, this is a living, working document that is subject to change and adjustment. But one of the things we looked at is replacing the storefronts, continuing and finish fire alarm upgrades, doing some brick repair work, some mortar joint deterioration, replacing the glycol solution that's with the HVAC system, and then miscellaneous other items. And then at the middle school, replacing the entire roof system and the penthouses, removing and replacing the penthouse roofs, replacing the existing vestibule entrance area, removing the exterior panels and replacing those. And then you've got some exterior failed masonry, a number of areas, replacing the exterior doors, and then a number of other items combined for that. So, and then the other piece of this is that, these are all inclusive numbers, so they, they are assuming that you could, it's kind of like a cafeteria list, of individual items, but each item assumes that, you may do them individually. And so they all include a general contractor markup, design and estimating contingency, because, again, we just have a little paragraph description. There's an owner contingency for unknowns, and then soft cost allowances, which is a variety of other costs associated with the project. And so, this is all inclusive numbers. It's not just construction cost. So capital improvement plan, just some considerations while putting these together is that, you might want to package work items together for construction sequencing. So, for example, it may make sense to, if we're going to replace the HVAC system, and so we've got to take out the ceilings to get to the ductwork, it probably makes sense to change out the ceiling tile and grid and the lights at the same time, that sort of thing. If It may also make sense if you're doing roofing work on one building, does it make sense to package it together with roofing work on the other building to maximize, the dollars spent so that you can have a roofer in here, working on both buildings, and it's more attractive to contractors if it's a larger project and you can get them both done at the same time and put it out to bid at the same time. Investigating code triggers for package scope of work, minimizing the extensive work done at the buildings that may be affected by Phase 2 study. So that was a particular item of discussion, trying to look at the items and thinking, okay, yes, this should be done, but maybe that goes into priority 2 because we don't really know what happens or what's going to come out of the Phase 2 study. And so you don't want to put a lot of money into something like we talked about before with the site work, for example, without looking at the bigger picture. And then, again, living working document. So next steps, as I said, we'll be issuing our final report within the next few days. And then the next steps for the school district is to determine how you want to approach with proceeding with Phase 2 on the educational space analysis and option development. And then finally, I'm sorry that kind of ran down on the bottom of the page there, but just a brief overview of what Phase 2 is. It's taking a look at your current and future educational needs. So how does teaching and learning work or not work in the spaces that you have here today in each of the buildings? Looking at the space needs, the adjacencies, are these spaces located where they should be, educationally? Does math and science, do they want to be close together? Does it make sense for, any sort of integration with art or, maker labs or, all those kinds of things, are all the places where they're located right now, as of today, as originally designed 40 or 50 years ago, is that the appropriate location and placement of them as they relate to one another? Looking at grade configurations, enrollment projections, and this is a very inclusionary process. You guys were talking about earlier about reaching out to students and staff and so forth. This whole process is very inclusionary in that sense. So this would be multiple sessions where you'd have parents and teachers and students and community members all coming together and brainstorming through a series of sessions of information gathering. What works, what doesn't work, what are your concerns, what are the issues, how do you see things being different, and that sort of thing. And then, preparation and going back and putting together a series of concepts and then bringing that back out to the same group and saying, here's some ideas, let's hear some feedback, and then finalizing with a series of options that come out of that whole kind of inclusionary process. And all that information also takes into account all of the issues and recommendations that came out of this Phase 1 report. And so the options that will result from that might range from, repairing only, right? Only dealing with the Phase 1 items. It might be renovations and additions. It might be consolidation. It might be new construction. And, so there's a wide range of options that might go into those kind of considerations there. And then prioritizing and the options and putting together cost estimates. Any questions, comments, reactions?
I just wanted to clarify for the public that, and I think it's reasonably clear in the presentation, but this does not, the cost estimates and all this does not include really anything that we've talked about in the past in terms of a new cafeteria at
Right.
the high school or a new gym at the middle school. It doesn't really include anything other than upgrading the buildings to a modern standard, really, these two buildings.
Right, exactly. It doesn't address any of the space issues or configurations. It's just upgrading the infrastructure itself, the mechanical systems, electrical, plumbing, the brick, windows, roofing, that sort of thing.
Question for you.
Yes.
And some of the issues here, like the parking, I mean, with the issue of pickup and drop off in the morning, and apparently that this is a problem, as the student representatives have let us know. I didn't see solutions offered for that. I mean, we got solutions for
Right.
leaks and leaking roofs, but not for crowded parking lots.
Right, and that all happens as part of this Phase 2 process.
Okay.
And it makes sense to be done at that time because, we'll be looking at both buildings in terms of the bigger picture. And so that's when any site suggestions and improvements will happen because it'll occur simultaneously with what's happening inside the building. Did I miss anything, you guys? I don't know. Is there anything that?
Parking lots are the main concern. That seemed like the immediate concern, like that junior lot. It's atrocious.
No, it's helpful, a little overwhelming.
Yeah, I'm sure, yeah.
And, but I think, again, as you said, this is an important component, which is exactly why we did this, is to ensure that before we make decisions, and again, Bridget alluded to cafeterias in the past.
This thing is so ugly.
You've alluded to the roofing projects, but one of the things that we've kind of been mindful in our stewardship work is to allow this work to happen so we can be better informed and do it more sequentially and comprehensively without doing something that doesn't have the bigger plan in place. So I think this will definitely be a really helpful, this has been helpful and will be helpful in informing our future, whichever way we end up going. So, appreciate it.
Good.
Thank you.
Is there anything in the Phase 1 that would be moot if something really changed with the Phase 2?
I mean, there's quite a few things that could be impacted, yeah.
Just thinking about the parking, something that's gonna probably be later, is there anything that's inverse, that's gonna be determined, that seems so obvious to us, but something that's a physical plant thing, if some piece of the building is no longer gonna be used, or.
Yeah, I think we would, Phase 2, and that collection of information and sharing will be really informative, right, to determining those steps. Again, I don't want to be so forward to say that it would be, a total new building beside one of the buildings, and then take away the old, which takes away some of the issues that are there. To be able to redesign traffic flow that's safer, for instance, So I think there's probably a lot of sequencing that needs to go on. I think the other part of that is we've tried to, and again, Rob alluded to some of that around some of our safety and security, like with our vestibule entrances. We're trying to address those now. Obviously, if that's something that we think has a high priority now, and some of these can't wait. And we'll have to obviously take some of the now more deeper assessment on, like our roofs, and we'll have to make some determination on what are we going to do as we plan for next year's budget and kind of re-up our stewardship plan, irrespective of the direction that we may be going. But again, we did delay some things in some of our elementary schools based on master planning and visioning. We did not do a lot of major delays on these properties, although we're at end of life on a lot of things that we've identified in our stewardship plan. I think the other part is important, and again, I appreciate Rob, talking about, the work of our stewardship plan. I think, we're one of the few schools that does have that. But I think the other part of that is we've not been able essentially to fully burden our stewardship plan. And I think through the budget process, we talked about kind of about a $525,000 kind of
Run rate,
amount spread over 5 buildings that are all kind of in that same vintage. And what we know is, first of all, when we first started the stewardship plan, we weren't able, there were so many, there was a long list. We scheduled those out, we triaged those, but even now, as we've not been able to fully burden that stewardship plan, there are things that are falling behind. Thus, is part why we've got a $950,000 bond to try to do some, catching up to the stewardship plan.
Yeah, and David, I really look at this as really an excellent and thorough audit of the facilities as they exist today. The intent, I think, was always to inform.
That's right.
The board and administration around what the emerging needs would be with the existing physical plant and allow for some planful accommodation of funding those. But I think phase 2 will really complement the needs that were identified and I like you said, I don't want to, we've gone through a master planning process before. I think this is leveraging off of that knowledge with new information and this audit. But I also think we're talking about, planning for the next 50 years too. So it's hard not to look at the audit and just take it as a series of projects, because to do that really doesn't allow for that vision of what a public education in South Burlington needs to look like for the next 50 years. So this was sobering, but thorough.
Right. I do want to add one other part, because I want to make sure people are connected. Like, we've done a deeper dive on the high school and the middle school in this phase 1. And I have gotten some questions specific to, I know you're working on master planning, and I know that involves all 5 schools. And so where are you at with the 3 elementary schools? Have you done something like this? And obviously, I am working on providing you with some input and thoughts around next directions, which includes the 3 elementary schools as well as these 2. But I think what we'll need to do is talk more deeply. This could be part of the next steps. But we will certainly fully burden our stewardship plan with some level of probably, guardrails on those percentages. To say that we're going to hit it totally accurate, would be wrong. But I think a lot of people would have maybe they would have guessed this kind of number or close. We're probably going to need to be realistic in some of the same vintage type materials or structures at the elementaries as we look at the kind of the next step, phase 2. So thanks again, Rob, and thanks, John. John, again, has been helpful in kind of shepherding a lot of the work and helping to schedule and all of that. So very much appreciated.
Any other questions or comments from the public?
Rob, do you know the size of the generator that would be proposed on a site like the high school?
No, off the top of my head, I don't.
Something obviously would need to pick up the load.
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, your generator can run the full gamut of, providing backup power for the entire building, or, it could provide, boilers, maybe the kitchen, like the freezer and cooler, emergency lighting, to get through the hallways, the elevator, the primary areas. So it all depends, and that's part of the discussion that we would typically have with a school district, is to talk through what items, would you want to keep up and running in an emergency situation.
Are you going to just replace the membrane, or are you going to go give it more support underneath?
So typically the process that we would go through in a roof replacement is you go through and do test cuts where you cut through the membrane and through the insulation to confirm, is there another roof, an older roof underneath it, number one, or are there multiple roofs under there? How much insulation is there, and what type of insulation is it? And Sometimes we might do a thermal envelope, a thermal scan to make sure there's no wet insulation. And so the results of all of that kind of test cut and analysis might determine that, you may have to replace all of the insulation and membrane down to the deck. We've assumed that in these estimates is that we would take the existing roofing membrane and insulation down to the deck and put in new tapered insulation that actually slopes to the drains, as opposed to the flat roof areas that you have there. And, and then put in additional blocking as needed around the perimeter and new fascia. So we've taken the approach of needing to upgrade the insulation and the membrane together.
The full gamut.
Yep.
Thanks, Rob.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
We'll move on to agenda item 11, policy review, and we have 4 policies here.
So this is the second reading on the executive limitation 2.4, and the specific one was item number 8, spend the prior year's undesignated fund balance, replacing that away from the surplus. So that's the change. I don't believe there's probably a lot of conversation on that one, and if you're okay, we can move on to the third reading. Next is the next 2, actually, I'll just call those out. First readings on board member code of conflict of interest and code of conduct. Again, we think this is probably appropriate to update them again. We did have it on an earlier agenda, and we talked about it a little bit around kind of connected to new board orientation, but again, we think this is worthy of, number 1, communicating and updating to the public, and also having it on. I think actually some of you actually brought this up as well. So if you're okay with that, I don't know, again, I don't want to be pushing here, maybe.
Quick question. So how is this different than the current policy?
It's not.
It's not, okay. I just want, all right.
Well, actually, you're talking about B1?
How about B1 to start with, yeah, the board member conflict of interest.
It's like, I actually, in my project over the crummy weekend to reorganize all of my board materials, I had my old copy of B1. It does look like we've added a paragraph 7 under implementation.
Paragraph 7.
Or bullet 7, which is regarding employment, which doesn't seem to, of course, the policy version I had was last revised in 2007. I don't know if I would have had that, but it stopped at 6.
What was the date on that, Steve?
It was January 17th, 2007. That was not on the
Okay,
site.
we'll look.
Yeah, that sounds.
We'll make sure that reflect that. You should be seeing the ones that's most current in or reflective of change, so thanks for that.
Yeah, and the one thing I'd point out on this is one of the
MB1.
discussions I've been involved in regarding conflict of interest is just that there be a remedy for a noted conflict of interest, which this policy does include on the back page of how to handle that.
So then B2 is the board member code of conduct. Now, I'm a little nervous to say that it's no change, but I don't know that. Do you have that, Mr. Cleanup Library?
Several old iterations of this.
Yeah.
So it sounds like those 2 we should check and make sure it's
Yeah,
the most
we can do
recent.
that. Mhm.
That one actually does look the same.
What, I'm sorry, what's that?
It looks the same as the B2 that I had.
Yeah, and the only thing I would say on this one is it doesn't really have a remedy on it. If in fact there was an identified code of conduct issue, so
Violation.
that might be something we consider for the next reading.
Like what kind of remedy?
Just how,
violation of it.
how a violation would be brought to,
So would you check with the VSBA to,
That might
because I
be-
mean, we can't kick somebody off the board who's been elected.
no, but we should, actually, I think the
I don't-
VSBA might have some guidance
I
on
don't think you can.
how to handle any code of conduct issue.
Violation of remedy.
Could be good. Maybe I'm wrong.
Okay.
It wouldn't be the first time.
Martin wants to throw me off the board. and he's
Sanction
trying to
them,
figure out-
or you could say something about it. I didn't think that you could.
I think that's a question if it's an elected position.
Right, that's, yeah.
There has to be some pretty agreed violations, I think, but.
Oh, we'll find out.
So if we could, yeah, maybe check with the VSBA on that.
Hey, there's somebody who might know the answer to this,
I'm
right?
sorry, Linda.
Our parliamentarian.
Absolutely definitive. My understanding is the limit that can be done is reprimand. But,
Right. That's what I thought.
I don't know.
Well, here we
I
have
don't.
censure.
I mean, the maximum can be done, excuse me.
So if two of us kind of think it's right, then it must be right, right?
Well, and actually, maybe the policy should spell that out too, then, so, okay.
Yeah, should spell it out.
And then we've got guidelines on social media. This is just a review.
The other thing I'd say on this is we sort of kind of do maintain a Facebook account for the school board communications.
You kind of have been doing that a little bit, haven't you?
Kind of. On a not very regular basis, but I do try to put the, at least the school board meetings, or when we cancel school board meeting, at least communicate that. And then it's there in case we need it.
So maybe we should consider modifying that to suggest it's an information only.
And basically, it's just used to, yeah, it's an information only, and it's basically just used to direct people to other school district resources. It's just another method of making sure the public's aware of how to get information from the district.
I think we should start Snapchatting. What's even more, that's so 2016. What should we be doing to be the hip school board? That's an improvement for us?
I mean, if you want, more students to come here and be aware of the.
We'd Snapchat?
Yeah, I
Well,
think
then-
Snapchat would be very effective.
Well, could we set our Snapchats to not expire?
Oh, no, that defeats the purpose. That's any other
Yeah.
social media.
Yeah.
Maybe we could tweet them.
Now you've shown your non-hipness. I even knew that.
Well, I'm an old-fashioned Facebook person.
I'd like to delegate our Snapchat account to Martin.
I don't know, Elizabeth, I might pay money to see you with a Snapchat filter, with like, cat ears or
That has
something.
happened.
All right, I'm gonna send out my first Snapchat. Okay.
Okay.
But the only friend I have
Any
on
action on-
Snapchat
any
is my
change on
daughter,
that,
so.
Yes, we're gonna, on the social media communications, we're gonna look at a modification that says, the district does, have a Facebook account for information-only purposes to direct,
Do we need to have that changed in the policy, though? Does that-
well, it's explicitly wrong right now in that
Yep.
it says it does not currently maintain, and maybe we
Sorry.
just don't spell it out, but.
So does somebody, you want to someone want to redraft and send it back? You want me to take a shot at changing that? What would you like?
I'm happy to take a crack at drafting like an extra sentence or two and sending
try to
it
be
back
thorough
to.
on that.
My question for you, Martin, is did we ever actually set up Twitter? We talked about it.
Yeah, there is a
There is a
Twitter
Twitter account, but it's not really actively maintained at the moment. Okay.
All right.
All right, agenda
Jen?
items.
I mean,
there
sorry,
is a
Jen has a
question.
comment.
Oh, yep, Jen, sorry.
I just want to first give like everyone a virtual high five for the policy, because I think it's really great you have one. And also to suggest maybe for that issue on Facebook that you say something along the lines of any school board social media platform will be for information only. If stuff happens to class, it's been trying to keep the policy for a while, it's Facebook specifically call that out.
True.
Yes.
So that would allow a Snapchat then.
Yeah, you want an Instagram story.
Instagram.
All right, we'll move on to agenda item 12, executive limitations policy monitoring. We have ends monitoring first, academic proficiency. Hopefully people brought their copies from the last meeting.
Okay, so, again, as consistent with what we've done is we've either
This is
highlighted the
really
changes
just about
or,
the superintendent's
that's right.
interpretation.
Correct.
The other parts of, we had gone over, but this has been delayed several times because of length of agenda. So based on the feedback from last time in the superintendent's, we've decided to stay with the first paragraph, but eliminate the second recommended paragraph. It's because of the questions regarding transferable skills and the ends. So this is our interpretation. What we're really looking for is for the board to say yes or no, or make some very specific recommendations so that we can go forward with the other parts of the ends policy, excuse me, besides academic, and get those out before the end of the year, school year.
Thanks, Stuart. I think a lot of the second paragraph created a fair amount of confusion, and it created some conflicting, I guess confusion is probably better, and when we tried to tie those together.
That looks sufficient from my perspective. Any other comments? Are you thinking about it, Martin, or?
Well, I'm trying to decide if we need, if the superintendent should be interpreting the subsections, or is that not required? Or did you, and I just somehow missed it?
Well, by subsections, you mean each of the
Right.
pieces of academic proficiency
We're reviewing this
as a
one.
separate.
Yeah.
This-
Normally, I
Action
think you
actually
would,
for
but it
tonight,
doesn't probably make a whole lot of
No, we've
sense
had this
on this
on.
because
I would
they're pretty self-explanatory.
continue
I
with
would
it.
think it would get very verbose if you had to go through every single one, because it's not just academic proficiency, but then a descriptor for what you mean by writing.
I don't know that everybody's clear on what Martin's asking. The subcomponents, I think what you're asking is,
Right,
like,
I mean,
number
those
one,
are in
building
the
strong
policy.
content,
Yeah, those are-
knowledge consistent with state-approved standards, and then Martin's asking, the question is, should we
So-
have interpretation under each one of those? Is that your?
Right.
Yeah,
So,
we see these, I see these as all kind of wrapped together underneath that one particular academic proficiency, 1.2 proficiency policy. And so how I interpret it, and then kind of the components below are the actual
right, but,
events, you know.
right, no, I got that. Couple things, though. So there's not an interpretation of academic proficiency. I mean, the only interpretation we have right now is just of the overall ends policy, the global ends policy. Yeah, it's just, I mean, for most of the policies we have, there's an interpretation of the overall item, and then there's interpretations as necessary for the subsections.
So Martin, that's not totally true. If you look under the academic proficiency, and you go through after 7, there's the superintendent's interpretation, all learners are expected to demonstrate.
Where am I seeing that? I'm sorry.
I don't have it on, that would be 2 of 29.
Yeah, I don't think they have that, Stuart, in their pack, though, do they? I don't believe so.
So there is interpretation in the online?
I do have it on.
Okay, I just didn't see it
Yeah,
on what I'm looking at.
Well, it's not in your
here.
stuff, no.
All right, well, I mean, I think that's fine, and to the extent that you're, well, maybe we need to look at that part of the interpretation as well, because to the extent that you're not offering an interpretation for these other 7 listed items, which are part of the policy, it should at least be referred to in your interpretation of the umbrella academic proficiency, for instance. That, it should be somehow referred to that
But the detail policy supports the interpretation?
Well,
Yeah, I can see if you want some more on the interpretation of, like, 1.2, academic proficiency. I would have a hard time trying to put interpretations around the specific,
right.
calling of, building strong content knowledge consistent with, that would seem to be kind of a redundant.
Right, no, I understand that.
See.
But if it's in your interpretation of 1.2, noting the necessity of following 1 through 7, for instance.
Yeah.
I think that would be.
And so that would be consistent within 1.1 lifelong learning, 1.2
Yeah, I think so.
academic, and just give a brief interpretation of how I do
Right,
that.
right. I think the global interpretation is fine, but.
So is the proposal that the first paragraph under the monitoring report be changed to David's shorter interpretation here? The one paragraph?
That's correct.
Is this,
Mhm.
so this would become this, is
Yep.
that accurate?
Yep.
So we've reviewed evidence on this before, so are we prepared to kind of go through this and do the monitoring report summary?
Or if Martin, and not that I'm wanting to delay, but,
I
again,
think
this is a
it's-
whole board conversations, but if that's a request of the board to put a interpretation to 1.2,
I think I'd like to look at the interpretation of 1.2 and look at this more closely. I thought we were only going to be talking about the interpretation.
Right, because I think we already determined that the policy is still out of compliance,
Right.
and so that's the record. It's
So
out
that
of
was the,
compliance.
okay, so from an action standpoint, then, we can do that. Although, Martin, on the summary sheet, are you suggesting that 1.2 have more detail than,
Well, is that your interpretation? Is that the interpretation there, or no?
well, I think, that's what we've had there, so I'm not titling it interpretation, it's what I
It's
would
the
say
policy.
clarification to the specifics of the,
Okay.
of 1.2,
Sorry.
lifelong learning. 1.2 academic proficiency, yeah.
All right.
so you still want to review?
It's not necessary, I think, this round, if we
Okay.
need to move ahead, but I think that,
And your suggestion, Stuart, is because we know we're out of compliance, then
Yeah, let us,
we'll let that
I'd rather
stand.
move ahead and give you the other 3 reports, and within that, I'll make sure that, and I will clarify and send, because there is a superintendent's on my copy specific to academic proficiency.
I don't know why that's not showing up here then. It doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
so, I think we should bring it back, I apologize,
Okay.
to look at the
That's okay.
interpretation, but also, normally if it's out of compliance, there's a plan for getting into compliance. That's
Which I
something
believe
that
is at the end of the
Yeah, it's in the
report.
page.
Is it?
Yeah.
Yes. Because
Did
my
I bring the
report is
wrong
out of
one today?
compliance.
All right, maybe I say, wait a sec. Which page is that on?
Would be the last page I was mentioning.
Is it
Yeah,
page
page
33?
33.
Is it page 34?
Why, because you don't have,
Because I only have the odd numbered pages in my report here.
yeah,
Hold on, until I get to the bottom of my electronic copy.
yeah, there's not, we don't have as we normally do, Stuart, we don't have that attached in here as our corrective action.
So it looks like there's the need to put it on the agenda again and
Okay,
augment it with the information you seem to have that's not,
There's a summation there, it should be a summation, and the report of policy non-compliance.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
not,
and
it's
it's
not showing it
just-
like that.
and I don't
Okay.
have that either.
All right, sorry.
Okay.
No, we get to bring it back. You
All
thought
right,
we were
we'll
doing
bring that one back. 2.10 curriculum development review.
So just one, that shouldn't hold up if you want to bring the other.
No, we need to move on those.
That's fine, I have
other-
enough now.
Right, all right.
Okay, so curriculum development and review, we have had some previous discussions around the insertion of district and striking board. That's consistent through here. And then there are some changes specific in here around some of the other specific language, like expectations, grade level expectations, et cetera. So, Stuart, you want to highlight anything else?
Sure,
I know we've had a
so-
conversation on this one, too.
Well, we did actually, it was delayed last time. The only conversation was that Bridget had pointed out that the links were not accurate, and there were two aspects of that. One was the old website and updated, and when I did the report, because I go to the regular website, I didn't check the link, and I apologize for that. But the other was and I did change the report on the second page. Because of it, we actually have put down the public site for the moment as we've changed the templates for proficiency-based, so that what the public sees is actually accurate to what we do. So the biggest things in yellow, as David mentioned, we did change the policy last year. We had 3 readings so that it read district instead of board ends, and so that still was a change and therefore reflected. And the key piece that I just want to stress, as we try to keep our curriculum up and running, is that the state has all out, basically changed all the standards over the last 8 years, starting with the Common Core, to the Next Gen, to the new PE, to the new health, to the new art and music standards, to now, finally, I was at a workshop today with 9 of our social studies teachers. I'm only there today. They're there for 2 days, learning from one of the authors of the C3 social studies curriculum. So as we can move forward and bring the new standards into line with what we do and teach, and that's a particularly fun thing for elementary teachers who teach everything. Who have really had quite a fun run. So, and then the other piece is that we have continued to build on our universal design for learning and running our curriculum camp. And finally, the big other yellow piece is, last week you did approve our district CIP. By the way, the state has since approved our district-wide CIP. So that was a good sign for us as we move to the school ones. But that is a change in process. We've never had to have a district. We've only had building-based continuous improvements, and before that it was action plans. So that is a different step for us. So that's basically within the piece, and I report compliance because while everything is a shifting and moving part, we are shifting and moving with the parts. And so it was in compliance last year, and I put forward that it's still in compliance.
Thank you, Stuart.
All right. So should we do this report summary?
Yeah.
All right, so just a quick review of 2.10 curriculum development and review. The superintendent shall not allow the district to be without written curricula aligned with Vermont standards and district ends policies that are coordinated across all grade levels and schools. Further, the superintendent shall not fail to review the curricula periodically based upon student performance results, learning opportunities data, new research, and updated content knowledge with the goal of all students meeting the district ends policy. Reasonable interpretation,
Yes.
adequate data,
Yes.
and in compliance.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we'll move on to agenda item 13, setting the agenda for the May 2nd meeting. And we already know we have to bring back academic proficiency, ends monitoring.
Yeah, so we can take off 2-1.
Okay.
Seems like we had something else we needed to carry forward here.
Can I suggest, I think I raised this a little bit ago as far as the, well, there it is. Student publications, free speech. How about that? All right, good, thanks.
And I may need to add one based on the island's request, depending on how that moves forward again, for folks to know that we do have a lot of island students, but there is a request to see whether or not 7th graders could come earlier. So if, depending on that movement, I may have something before the board for a discussion on the 2nd. That's all at this point, I can.
And Martin, what's the legislative calendar? Will there be an update by this meeting?
May 2nd, no.
Okay.
Following meeting.
Anything else for the May 2nd agenda? All right. Seeing nothing at this point, we will move on to future agenda items.
So I'd add for, and it won't be for a little while, but to keep it on our radar, the teacher evaluation, an update at some point once this next stage of the implementation is done. I'm also not sure what tools for transparency means anymore.
That was also an item that came up as part of the election process.
No, that was more of sort of developing some kind of report that just sort of is clear with the community about where we are on budget, and it's really mostly about budget, but any other sort of decisions that we're making. But, so for example, there was a lot of discussion in the community about where we were versus budget. Were we ahead of budget or behind budget as we came up to town meeting day this year? And there are a lot of numbers sort of thrown around, and I think there just could be tools that are clear with the public in interpreting all this information that kind of gets thrown out there during the budgeting process. And we had talked about that for the last couple of board meetings, just developing some simpler thing that sort of keeps the public updated so they feel like, you know, they're clear on where we are on different initiatives within the budget, and also where we are budget versus actual as we go into town meeting day.
So something related to that, so I attended this community conversation last night. I know Patrick was there and some other folks, including our, hopefully very soon, to be future director of guidance counselor was also there. And the assistant principal was there, right? And Alyssa was all the new
John
one.
Craig.
John, thank you. Yeah, any event, Lisa, is it Bettinger?
Bettinger. Yeah.
Benninger, okay. She suggested that, you know, for, if we have any future controversial community-wide type decisions that we need to make, not that we will ever run into controversy again, I'm sure. She would like to talk about some processes that we could perhaps use with the school board use for those kind of decision-making where we want to have more community involvement. So maybe we want to put that on the future agenda items to hear from her and what her ideas might be.
Above and beyond public hearings?
Well, it could be just a matter of how to
run the hearing.
how to run the hearing so it's more effectively, a more effective manner of, because I mean, we had master planning and visioning public hearings, and frankly, a couple of them were not the most useful. I mean, the participation wasn't that great. I mean, part of it could be how we reach out to more people, et cetera, so. We can hear from her.
Just on future agenda items, because obviously you just approved 2.10, you just improved the continuous improvement plan last week, and I think in your second meeting in May, the rest of them will come to you, all these school-wide ones. I don't think you need to leave that as a future agenda item, because I think that's coming to you as a regular agenda item.
The EQS.
The EQS
Yeah.
piece on continuous improvement plans.
Nice job, Stuart, getting one
Diane
crossed
Bugby
off.
would be proud.
That's great.
I did it
For Diane, that's good.
All right. Consider the minutes of the April 4th meeting. Seeing no comments or changes, those are approved by consensus. I did notice on those minutes that we still have Martin listed as clerk, so
Oh.
we'll have to modify that.
Oh, yeah, gotta get.
Sorry, Bridget.
I'm one who's more.
Move on to agenda item 16, the consent agenda.
Yeah, so let me just highlight some of these quickly. Actually, I need help, Patrick, on Anna Chang. She's been with us this year, is that?
She's been with us 2 years.
She's been with us, so this is a little addition to FTE, is that correct?
Nope.
Same.
John Luce was a 1.0 German teacher. He left the district. We filled that with a .8.
Gotcha.
Moved a French teacher over .8,
And this is the point.
and this is the hanging .2, right?
Okay. So Anna Chang's been with us. Michelle Cannon's been with us this year, but again, she's been was on a 1 year, so this fully brings her on. Alexis Scott's been a long time at our Rick Marcotte School. She was full-time, went half-time. This is an opportunity with a retirement to bring her back up. And then Megan Sweet, whom Martin referenced earlier as being recommended as the new director of guidance. And so that's an important recognition, replacing Tim Weil. And then retirements and/or resignations, again, most of these, I guess I won't make the decision which those are. But Maureen Caruso, longtime educator at Rick Marcotte. Jane Dahl, same thing at Chamberlain. Carolyn King, longtime educator at Rick Marcotte. Deb Paul, science teacher here at Tuttle. And Eric Stone, longtime science teacher, math teacher, sorry, caught me on that.
Science and math.
Clear, I didn't write that,
Well,
but.
and actually, if you're going to be accurate, Deb Paul's been teaching math for the last 2 years.
That's true.
She's
So,
actually, at the
again,
moment, a math teacher.
Anyway, that's, those are very notable transitions to the district with many, many years. So, I would be remiss not to thank them for all the significance in which they've provided students, so.
Yeah, these are all longtime contributors, so on behalf of the board, I will extend our thanks and gratitude.
Yeah, question for you, David. Alexis Scott, you said started out as full-time, went to half-time, and is going back to full-time? Or one?
Right, and so she has rights to a .5 already,
Uh-huh.
so she doesn't have rights to the other. So this was as a result of a retirement, she's filling that other .5 that's not really,
Okay.
that she doesn't have, she doesn't
Right.
have.
So
Even though she was employed full-time, when somebody leaves,
Yes.
then that goes away. You can't just come back to because of that opening. You have to.
Yeah.
So that's part of that, Phil.
Okay, thank you.
Move on to AP orders 39, 40, and 41. Any questions?
I have one small question on 40. There was a 46,000 or so payment to the Burlington School District. I'm assuming that just has to do with the students that are.
Provided services.
Yeah, provided services there. Okay, I just wanted to clarify.
Same thing you're going to see on the Essex piece, which you're going to see, item 18, which you'll get to in a moment. But
It's just the Essex was over the $50,000
That's correct.
limit, and the 46,000 was just kind of
Mhm.
just under it. Okay.
Yep.
Just clarifying.
And on agenda item 18, we have an AP order to Essex Westford in the amount of $71,254.50. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved?
Second?
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes.
I move to adjourn.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you.
Great. Thank you,
Got a
everybody.
few signatures here.